Good afternoon. We're so happy that you can join us today. My name is Susan Evans, and I am honored to welcome you to today's webinar. I have a connection and deep respect with the caregiver experts joining our webinar today. My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease 11 years ago. Overnight, I went from being a daughter to a caregiver, concerned for the progression of his disease, and also my dear mother who lost her partner in life. In 2015, we made the decision to move my father to a home. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. The guilt was overwhelming. Caring for my father at home was becoming too much for my mother, and I did not want to lose both my parents to Alzheimer's disease. Our family chose Kensington Senior Living because of their expertise and commitment to dedicated memory care. It was the hardest, yet best decision we made. The team at Kensington has taken exceptional care of my father for the last 6 years and my mother pre-COVID, who had lunch with him daily. I am one of the 30 million caregivers in the country. Thank you, Kensington, for supporting and sponsoring these efforts through educational webinars. It's a lonely disease riddled with guilt for the caregivers. Today, please ask any questions that you have in the Q&A function that we will get to at the end of the program. We have also included questions that you have submitted during the registration process. Everyone will receive a copy of today's webinar to share with friends and family. You will also receive links to connect with our wonderful panel. Please join me in welcoming Kristen Kachiki. She is a licensed clinical social worker for the Department Senior Care Network for Huntington Health Hospital in Pasadena. That is a mouthful. Kristen, please join us, and thank you. Please enjoy the presentation. I'll see you at the live Q&A.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much for that. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so pleased to be here with you. Again, my name is Kristen Kachiki, and I've been a clinical social work specialist at Huntington Health in Pasadena for over 10 years. When Susan, who you just met, first approached me about putting this webinar together, I was completely on board. This topic is near and dear to my heart. Through my work at Huntington, I have been allowed to work with individuals who are caring for their loved ones who have a diagnosis of cognition issues. And I have also had the opportunity of working with individuals who have a diagnosis, and the pleasure has been all mine. I've been able to hear the triumphs and the challenges and everything in between. I also recently have become a caregiver for my mother, who is experiencing some cognition changes, and the perspective has been widened even further. I am extremely honored to introduce your expert panel today. I will admit that I've had the opportunity of working with each and every one of them here today, and the pleasure is all mine. I would first like to introduce Dr. Holly Edge-Booth. Dr. Holly, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, Kristen. Thank you so much. And Susan as well for allowing me to be a part of this fantastic webinar through Kensington. Again, my name is Dr. Holly Edge-Booth. I am a clinical neuropsychologist. I have been in practice since 2006. I formerly worked through UCLA as well as Casa Colina Centers for Rehabilitation. And I have had a wonderful experience working through Huntington Health and Huntington Hospital over the course of the past 10 years. So as a neuropsychologist, I essentially specialize in the assessment and understanding of the brain, behavior, and thinking. And I commonly work with individuals and families who have unfortunately been stricken with these dementias and Alzheimer's and a broad range of cognitive impairments that can significantly negatively impact the patient and the family as a whole. And I'm really passionate about attempting to educate patients and families about how they might be able to mitigate some of the decline and essentially engage in lifestyle practices and behavioral challenges and changes that might actually promote some of the offset over the decline, and hopefully allow for people to have some optimization of functioning and lower the stress for patient and families. So I'm really, really pleased to be here today, and I'll wait here to hear all of the other expert opinions as well.
Thank you so much, Holly. So grateful that you could be here. Next, I'd like to use Mr. Ralph Pasquale. Ralph, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hello, my name is Ralph Pasquale. I have been with LA County for 22 years now, and 8 years of which I was an APS social worker. I lead the APS training program, which recently won a National Association of Counties Award, an achievement award. And I'm very much proud of that, mainly because it is really a collaboration of all these different agencies and APS in providing training to our staff and also the community at large. I am also an adjunct faculty here in Pasadena. I'm a local Pasadena resident, and I'm really proud to actually teach as well in the community. So I am very grateful to be here, and again, I was completely on board when both Susan and Kristen asked me to be on this panel today. So hopefully you'll get a lot from this webinar today, and please feel free to ask questions. Thank you very much, Kristen.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you so much for being here. And last but not least, one of my very favorite humans, Ms. Vicki Ball. Vicki, would you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, my name is Vicki Ball. I was first faced with the hint of dementia when my husband, Dick, of 42 years, announced he was having difficulties in processing accounting entries for our business, and asked for help that was so unusual for him. His background was always banking, and his forte was numbers, and that was what was going away. And this was about 9 years ago. Subsequently, he was diagnosed with early dementia, Alzheimer's. Okay, while this required us to make changes in how we operated our business and our daily life, the impact of dementia and Alzheimer's didn't really impact us too greatly for the early years. We lived a full life. He enjoyed his passion of golf. We had a great social life. We traveled extensively. He had a great sense of humor, which made everything so much easier. Unlike some individuals who are faced with dementia and Alzheimer's and are in total denial, Dick was not. He was understanding that he was having a disease and we were going to work through it. It was just during the last 2 years of his life that the full impact of Alzheimer's and dementia became much more apparent, and he was declining more and more pronounced. Dick's personality was very positive, and that really helped the whole process. I participated in Kristen's Powerful Tools program, and then both Dick and I participated in the Memory Club. And we found that to be very, very helpful in getting us to work through our daily lives. Unfortunately, the last 6 months, things became much more difficult. And I recognized I was going to need some additional help, either at home or finding a care facility for Dick. Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know how to look at it the best way, but we didn't have to make that decision. Dick had a fall, which subsequently led to his demise. So hopefully I can provide some information and help to people who are facing a similar type of program.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Vicki. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for being here today. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Ralph. Shall we begin? All right. We have our first question here is, and this is directed towards Ralph and Vicki. Please share with the audience your own caregiver experiences. What is caregiver burnout and any suggestions to avoid it? Ralph, can we start with you?
Sure. I forgot to mention earlier that I was a caregiver for my mom who suffered from vascular dementia. Although I had some really tough times being her caregiver, if you ask me if I do it again, sure, I would. Heartbeat. Yeah. A caregiver with burnout has become overwhelmed and is physically and emotionally and mentally exhausted, from the stress and burden of caring for their loved ones. They may feel alone, unsupported, and unappreciated. They often haven't been taking good care of themselves and may be depressed. Eventually, they can lose interest in caring for themselves and the person they look after. It is quite normal that almost every caregiver will experience burnout at some point. If it does happen and it's not addressed, the caregiver will eventually become unable to provide good care. And it is for this reason caregiver burnout can be harmful to the person receiving care as well as to the caregiver. While the work of providing care to someone can be challenging, the experience does not have to be negative. We can reframe it in such a way that it is an opportunity to give back care and affection to a parent who has been there for us and who has cared for us all our life. I just want to stress the fact that one caregiver shouldn't be expected to do it all. Ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. There are family members, there are neighbors, churches, and other community resources such as an adult daycare provider that's pretty much out there in the community. All you need to do is actually just ask for help, and the help is available.
Yes. Thank you, Ralph. Appreciate that. The definition of burnout, absolutely. We want to prevent it before it happens. Vicki, same question. What
I basically ran into was a feeling of frustration, kind of like, how much more can I give? The kind of almost the inability to cope, kind of questioning, what do I do now? It was like sometimes it's a daily question, a different way of approaching it. Just trying to remain calm. This is how I dealt with it. Trying to remain calm and making sure that when there's periods of anger that I just kind of try to remove myself from the anger, frustration, and so on. The burnout was really the inability to really reason with my husband, because his mental confusion was starting to increase. And the biggest amount of burnout was not being able to get good sleep. That seemed to be pretty demanding and required, because we need sleep to cope and so on. But help was definitely, your programs helped a lot. The program that I was able to, Dick was able to participate with CAPS, and where he met other people that were having the same things. So I'm not quite sure whether that's answering your question, but that was how my life was dealing with it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vicki. Very important. We have to take care of our biological needs. Absolutely. Sleep being a big part of it. And I know that Dr. Holly will address that as well. Second question, and this is for you, Vicki, is how to manage self-care without feeling guilty. How might one support a caregiver?
I had good friends that were there for me, that were willing to step up and come and stay with Dick if I needed a break. I had the ability to vent, and that was so important. Not negatively vent, but just getting my emotions out. And unfortunately, I didn't have family around, so my friends became my go-to group and so on. And that seemed to be, and then finding programs that I could participate or where I could, get some free time for myself. That's how I kind of take care of it myself.
Absolutely. I just want to quickly chime in. Another important aspect is really knowing what the big challenges are. And I think in my experience in working with groups, it is, as Ralph had mentioned earlier, really paying attention to the symptoms that are happening prior to burnout. We want to get to the point, we want to start noticing when we start to feel those minor irritations that we start to let go of, completely worried about it. But when these things first start to happen, that's really when it's really important to start getting help, start getting the support, start figuring out what self-care means. And I just want to reiterate, Vicki, getting the support, having that opportunity to vent, having that support system that knows where the bodies are buried and they're going to love us anyways.
That's
right. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Ralph, can you talk to us about what elder abuse is? How do I report it? And how are people with dementia potentially at an increased risk of elder abuse?
Sure. Elder abuse is defined as the mistreatment of an older person or a person with disabilities. Isolation is a huge risk factor. Elder abuse can occur when social supports are not in place to keep us connected as we age. The abuse can be intentional or unintentional. In the state of California, an elder person is somebody who's 60 and over. A dependent adult or a person with disabilities is somebody who is between the ages of 18 and 59 with physical or mental limitations. And there are also several types of abuse. They're mainly physical abuse, psychological abuse or mental abuse, financial abuse or exploitation. You have also neglect by the caregiver or self-neglect. While anyone is potentially at risk for abuse, some factors can increase one's risk of experiencing abuse. Like I said earlier, social isolation is a huge risk factor. Lack of access to support services and community resources is another one. And also the physical or mental or emotional needs in carrying out daily activities. And also dementia is one of those risk factors. How are people with dementia at risk of elder abuse? Well, they are more likely to depend on others for care. And they are less likely to care for themselves, leading to self-neglect. And also many develop difficult behaviors that can be very challenging for the caregiver. And also the consequences of abuse include stress or distress, physical or mental ill health, hospitalization, reduced survival, and institutionalization and financial loss. If you suspect abuse or elder abuse, you can report to Adult Protective Services. We do have a 24-hour elder abuse hotline, which I can actually put on the chat if needed, if you want to. It's 877-477-3646. As a concerned citizen, you can report anonymously. Mandated reporters, on the other hand, by law, need to provide their name and contact information. Caregivers, including family members, mandated reports can include caregivers, which includes family members, nurses, doctors, surgeons, and other types of primary healthcare employees are examples of your mandated reporters. There is a misconception, though, that when APS shows up at the door or at your door, that they're there to be punitive. That is not true. If anything, though, the APS social worker will attempt to connect the caregiver with caregiver resources. So again, all you need to have is reasonable suspicion to make a report to APS. Again, to repeat, anybody who's a concerned citizen and they're not a mandated reporter of elder abuse, they are welcome to make that report anonymously. And that's it.
Thank you, Ralph. Very, very important. And I do want to reiterate, that APS is not in place to be punitive. They are in place to provide intervention and assistance. Holly, this question is for you. How does psychology fit into the study of neurology, and how can the two be helpful in understanding the brain?
Thanks, Kristen. That's a great question. Hearing the stories of caregivers is something that is incredibly important and not always addressed in a 15-minute follow-up with a physician. Psychologists and neuropsychologists have more time. And in our system of how we dedicate care to patients, we actually set aside time to talk about these complex issues. Dementia is a very, very, very broad category of neurologic disease. Not all dementias are the same. Even within each specific category, whether it be vascular, like you discussed, Ralph, or Alzheimer's disease, there's a heterogeneity. People present with very, very different types of symptoms because every person that is unfortunately afflicted with dementia is a different, unique individual. So families are basically met with a myriad of different types of symptoms that may be very, very difficult to understand. So the field of neuropsychology is essentially dedicated to that marriage of how we think, feel, and act and behave, and what are the underpinnings of the brain that control those factors. So dementia in and of itself simply means someone has developed significant impairment in a couple of different domains of thinking or reasoning or general cognitive skills. And we have a broad range. I think most folks know mostly about Alzheimer's disease, but we also know a lot about vascular dementia, which can essentially be related to chronic stroke, even subclinical strokes. And there are more and more patients, unfortunately, who are also being afflicted by some of the atypical dementias, such as the frontotemporal dementias, progressive aphasic syndromes. And there are a myriad of patients that also may have two different types of dementias, which can be doubly complex. So I think because dementias are so complex and difficult, and because they impact an individual's ability to think and reason, as well as their behavior and personality, the field of neuropsychology can address those and educate patients and their families. And we really can't expect one caregiver to provide all of the needs and all of the care for a singular patient. I know spouses and families, they may feel that they're fully equipped, but it's simply not sustainable for one person to be a caregiver for someone with a dementia syndrome. So that's why I encourage there to be a distribution of care, because they're so complex.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Absolutely. So does research show how we can reverse decline? Does the research show up?
Yeah. Years ago, there was a researcher by the name of Peterson, and they really kind of came up with the differential diagnosis between what is normal aging and what is dementia. And so we have this middle sort of ground in what we call mild cognitive impairment, which may predict the potentiality that a patient may progress and develop a more severe, debilitating version of cognitive impairment. And we do know in the realms of MCI, and even within the context of having been diagnosed with a dementia, there are things that patients and family members can do to try to mitigate some of the significant debility and hopefully offset decline and optimize a patient's level of functioning. And I really kind of talk about 6 bullets for success. And I don't know if you can you probably can't see it because I have this background on, but I'll talk about the 6 tenets real quickly. We have to broadly protect our overall health our gut health, our kidney health, our cardiovascular health, our respiratory health, our joint health is all, we have a system. So our broad health it's important to protect in order to kind of protect and promote longevity and the health of the brain, and to help us potentially mitigate factors related to something like dementia. Even in light of dementia, it's very important for patients to remain physically active in some way, in a safe manner. Exercise and being outside is key. Regular vitamin D is really, really important. Simply 15 minutes a day of being outside, we know, can actually help patients function better, and getting some level of exercise. And again, I don't want patients of mine or any other one to go out and try to join some new exercise plan. I usually like for the exercise plan to be designed by a physical therapist or someone who knows about a patient's unique challenges if they have joint issues or back issues. But exercise is really, really key because it improves cardiac functioning, respiratory functioning, and actually increases the perfusion of oxygenated blood flow to the brain. Okay, and that helps our cells thrive more. It's truly, truly important for anyone with a cognitive impairment, whether it's MCI, dementia, or recovery from stroke, to actually fuel their body with good nutrition. In our culture, we think about food as filling. We should really think about as fueling our bodies and our brains. And the key is the Mediterranean nutrition plan with good proteins, lean meats, good brain fats, and lots of fresh fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds. And so I do recommend that people maybe see a nutritionist and how we can modify and implement a good nutrition plan. Because if patients are not eating regularly, and also if they're not hydrating regularly, we know we can see an amplification of cognitive impairment. A key factor too is activity level. Okay, we need for our patients to be engaged in a myriad of different tasks. They don't have to be complex tasks. Anything, engagement in hobbies, socialization, engagement in groups and family situations, these are very, very important. The more that patients become sedentary, and you will notice as dementia progresses, our patients tend to withdraw more. It's very important to engage individuals because that can offset some decline. The other key factors, I think, too, are sleep. Sleep is very important, and sleep can become very, very problematic. We can have nighttime awakenings, sometimes confusion. Sleep during the day, if there's hypersomnia or insomnia, we know that that can amplify cognitive challenges as well. And the other thing which is truly important, which I think is probably the hardest thing for caregivers and family members to handle, are what we call neurobehavioral features related to dementia. Those may be personality changes or anxiety or depression, or, patients may not be able to reason. They may not be fully aware of the gravity of their cognitive impairments. And times patients can become combative about simple things like brushing teeth, right? Or getting ready to go to a doctor's appointment. And I think that's a real frustrating thing for patients and for families as well. And it can cause some friction. And so I do think getting involved in talking with a psychologist or psychiatrist or neuropsychologist who's familiar with dementia can help families navigate when we have those complex neurobehavioral features. So those are just a few things that patients can do. And I definitely think getting connected with a social worker and a neuropsychologist also, so you can learn more about some of these protective factors.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I know that every time our group members left, they were always highly motivated, right? To start the diet, start the appropriate physical activity, talk to their doctor about getting sleep. So thank you for that, Holly. And so welcome back, Susan.
Oh, I'm just so impressed with all of you and so excited for our audience. Such good conversations and good tips. And I really wish that this was available 11 years ago, and it just wasn't. So I couldn't be happier. I have a question though, Holly. You talk about the 6 pillars to assist in reducing cognitive decline. Would those be the same to optimize longevity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The same factors we know can be protective and promote longevity and the health of the brain over the lifespan. And I counsel, I think most of us, if we have a loved one that has dementia, we're fearful that that's basically in our genetic loading and we might develop that. So the reality is genes may be 30 to maybe 35% of the expression of disease. And we now know that it's probably 70% environmental, lifestyle, behavioral. So there are a lot of things that we can do to hopefully promote the health of the brain. And I think hopefully with earlier detection, we're going to learn more about how to combat this horrible disease.
Oh, and thank you for expanding the 15-minute office visit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because when you are a sibling or you are, a spouse and you go in for these visits, you're like, wait, So I love that you said that because it really does take a village. So thank you for doing what you do. I'm going to start with some of the questions we received at registration. And I'm actually going to start with Vicki on this because Vicki and I had a long talk and I left our conversation just grinning ear to ear because Vicki shared with me how she found humor in this horrible plight that she had been, challenged with her husband. And so the question is, from your personal experience, what is the value of sharing stories?
It makes it so much easier when you can relate that it's not all dark and foreboding per se. You have to be able to smile, you have to be able to find some kind of light in it. I think I shared with you one of the things is during that first year of the pandemic, the Dodgers were playing and Dick was a great Dodger fan. Well, the Dodgers weren't playing, so all that was happening was they were playing games where they always won. Well, Dick thought that was fabulous because he said, oh my God, they're so good this year. They're going to go to the World Series again. Yeah, honey, isn't that great? You just agree with them. You just have to find the light on it. And that made him joyful. And then I found found a couple of friends that would take him for walks and take him to the zoo and take him out to lunch and those are the things that you've got to find the easy things to do.
Yeah, and I encourage everybody to chime in because these questions are for all of you. But Kristen, why don't you share a little bit about the value of sharing stories, personal experiences with other caregivers?
I think in terms of the support group process, it really does provide that opportunity. I'm not alone here. Mm-hmm. That's big. It's huge. The process of being a caregiver is so isolating, and the pandemic really, compounded that for a lot of individuals. And to know that the experience is shared, that the frustrations that they have is shared. I shared with you, Susan, that I had a caregiver that came into my support groups and said, and Ralph will know what I'm talking about is, I hit my sister last night. I got really upset and I hit her. And, immediately I was thinking, oh man, I got a report. But the entire group received her. They all kind of shook their heads and really rallied around her. And I learned a valuable lesson. I never forgot that, right? The power of being able to share your story honestly within a group setting probably prevented her from having to experience that hurt again,
Agreed. Ralph, do you have something to add?
Yeah, well, the thing is I'm going to go back to, because there was a question on the chat and I responded to that question. I just assumed that everybody knew what Adult Protective Services was. So again, repeat and reiterate that Adult Protective Services is a state mandated program that investigates elder and dependent health abuse. So we're available 24/7. But as far as sharing my story or somebody's story is that, again, this is an opportunity to help another caregiver to feel less alone. because in my case, sharing my perspective from male caregiver perspective, despite societal expectations, and according to a recent AARP study, 44% of family caregivers of older adults, or 6 million caregivers, are actually men. And 28% of these men are millennials. Although female caregivers still overwhelmingly outnumber male caregivers, the literature points to an increase in the number of male caregivers. Regardless of the circumstances, caregiving presents a host of demands. For the male caregiver, however, the long-standing stereotypes can make the experience even more challenging. Mm-hmm. As a caregiver, I felt so isolated at times when others looked down on me as out of place in the caregiver role. Mm-hmm. Because quite simply, the traditional caregiver idea, or the idea of a caregiver, is still a female. And therefore, a lot of these support programs and resources tend to be female-centric.
Mm. Very interesting.
Right. And the thing is, though, men can no longer be bystanders when providing care to older adults and their loved ones, because disregarding men as caregivers is overlooking a potential resource when developing a care plan for community-dwelling older adults. So, men are no longer bystanders. I mean, we have to actually pretty much get involved in the process, because, again, more and more, one of the reasons why more men are coming into, pretty much like becoming a caregiver, especially for their parents who are older parents or who might also have dementia, is that many of our women have joined the workforce. So that means there are more women who are just pretty much not available anymore in the traditional sense of the role of a caregiver. Mm. So there's more men.
Well, I'm just going to reiterate again, when I spoke with Ralph, I think it was a couple months ago, and he explained to me what his office does. I was so impressed that you're there to support everybody, and as you said, it's both the caregiver and it's the patient or the person that's being cared for, and that you offer like this resource availability. Right. Holly, do you have something to add?
I wanted to add too, I think one of the compounding factors is, as a culture, we don't talk very openly about mental health and in general. And I think, broadly speaking, a lot of people think that dementia is within mostly the realm of mental health, and it's brain health, as well as cognitive health, and it's also related to mood and feelings and thinkings, but this is a complex interplay between, a lot of biology and personality. And I think what happens is, because culturally we don't navigate those conversations well about mental health, I feel like a lot of my families and caregivers and patients wind up becoming increasingly more isolated because, frankly, their friends are afraid of dementia themselves. And they feel they don't feel like they're able to even understand and provide proper support. So they become further isolated from their typical social network. So having groups that are dedicated to educating individuals and sharing stories is really key. I want to commend all the work that Kristen has done with the Senior Care Network over the years, because I've worked closely with her. Just to tell the story, Kristen and her group have done this memory group, which was designed by the Alzheimer's Disease Association for many years. And I happened to be involved with a couple of the families that were involved in that first rendition of that group. And they met for 8 weeks, right, Kristen?
Yes. But
this group, they formed a bond, and they continued to meet, sometimes bi-monthly, the caregivers and the patients. And I have several family members that said it was just life-changing. It saved their lives, that they had this core group of people where they felt understood. And that's really, truly important for the caregivers and for the families. And I think it just made their lives so much more full because they had these other people to rely on.
Yes.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. And to the audience, we will be sending links to that support group that Kristen has managed. But we have a live testimonial here from Vicki, who actually participated in it. I'd love to hear from you, Vicki, about you know, how these caregiver resources assisted you. You spoke about CAPS, and then you also spoke about Kristen's group.
You know, and I was kind of at my wit's end when I approached Kristen, and her group was full, and she said, "Vicki, I don't have any room," but she took me on any which way. So I was just so grateful. And it just kind of, I came out of each session when we did the first one, I came out of each session just like there was a load removed from me. Mm-hmm. And I was able to, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one going through this. Hearing other people's stories really made a difference. And then when Dick and I went through the memory club, the same thing. He saw from other people that were there, the patients, their stories. And that did help tremendously. And I know we kept in touch for quite a while with our group, and that you're not alone. That's the nice part.
And a question just came in. Is there a cost associated with these support groups?
None. There's no cost, not for powerful tools. We ask you that you pay for the book. If you can't afford the book, we'll find out a way to get it to you. And there's no charge for Memory Club.
Now, that's fantastic. That was the right answer. You just won Jeopardy. I'm going to save this question for the end because all of you should absolutely participate in it. But how do you handle odd behavior as paranoia or having delusions? Like, what should I say? Does anyone want to take a stab at that? Holly?
I can take a stab at that. I really counsel people, because not all patients with dementia will develop paranoia or delusions or changes, but I would say probably 40 to 50% may at some point. So first and foremost, I think it's really important to be in contact with your neurologist, your primary care physician, and to also have on board potentially an excellent geriatric psychiatrist. Okay, it's a very, very specialized field, because we know we don't want our patients to become over medicated. We want our patients to still be able to engage and not be too sedated. But I think that these changes can happen. They can be very, very distressing for families. I kind of draw the line at if it's a safety issue, that's maybe when we need to address it. You know, if the patient is so confused that they are wanting to leave the home in the middle of the night, or if they're becoming combative, obviously that's something that has to be addressed because that's a safety issue. But there are times when people may have odd beliefs. They may think, there's the cat in the room, the cat that they may have had 20 years ago, or they may think that they're in their mother and father's home. What a lot of people don't fully understand is dementia and memory dysfunction develops in a temporal gradient, meaning patients will forget the more recent information and will hold on to those long-term memories for much longer. So patients will revert back to memories from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and even childhood. So I encourage, if it's something to the effect of where there's a little bit of disorientation, or they may think that someone else is in the room with them, make sure you kind of say, well, wow, I'm glad they're here. Making sure that they don't feel threatened in any way. And then sometimes I feel like maybe just distracting, like, hey, let's watch that. What are the Dodgers doing? What's the score right now? I think sometimes just distraction is a really good technique.
You know what I love that you said, I think everybody needs to hear this again, is the distinction between safety and behavior. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's huge, right? Because the behaviors, we can probably figure out on our own with techniques, with distraction and redirecting. But safety, get help.
Yes.
Safety is a big thing. I know, I knew someone that, fell in a pool and it just became too much because the spouse could not save him. I mean, you need help. So that was incredible.
Yeah. And Susan, I would say one thing too, one of the number one reasons why families become, when it turns into a more emergent situation at home, a lot of times it is related to the neurobehavioral features. So, and that complicates keeping patients in home. So I would say when you begin to see them, address them right away. Make sure your clinician knows so that a treatment plan can be developed before they become too progressed.
You know, and this leads me to my next question is, how do I know when to seek placement options? That's a tough one. I went through that. It was very difficult. Kristen, do you want to start with that, or Ralph?
I think, yeah, I would say it boils back down to safety, but Ralph, I'd like to hear what you have to say too.
The thing is, though, in my experience, what happened then is that, yeah, it's a safety issue for me. When my mom started wandering out of the house, that's when I made a decision to actually put her in a what do you call this? Assisted living facility, which is actually licensed for I believe 6 to 8 people. Because yeah, she is not feeding herself anymore. I mean, I would leave food for her, but she's not eating anything, and she would say that she's eaten, when in fact I still see the food on the counter table. So yeah, if it's become a safety, it's also become a health issue. I think that's a time to actually do the placement or make the decision to place your loved one. It's also, again, it's not really good for your mental health as well as a caregiver, because you're just distressed all the time and stressed all the time, thinking about is your loved one doing well on her own. When that becomes an issue, then the safety issue, then yeah, it's time to make that decision to place your loved one.
I love that we're talking about mental health. And I love that we're talking about the safety, not just for the dementia patient, but also for the caregiver. And I think that's really important. Kristen, do you have something to add?
Well, I think it's a couple of things, like taking Vicky's case, for example. Vicky's a very small woman and Dick was a larger man, right? And being alone, it wasn't going to be, in the event that Dick had a fall, Vicky wasn't going to be able to pick him up. And I see a lot of caregivers, men and women, right, that are providing assistance with transfers and ambulation, and they shouldn't be, and it is a safety issue, and we have to sometimes counsel them. I do want to just go back to some of the behaviors that we talked about earlier, some of the more disturbing behaviors that sometimes come up with the disease. And I would say 2 things. Always know that it's not your loved one. It is the disease presenting itself, right? It's the symptoms of the disease. Yes. And we talk about this a lot in groups. It's not the individual. And the other thing is, and I know Holly will, she can elaborate even more on this, is that really kind of doing an assessment of when the behavior starts to show up. Is it at night? There's a condition called sundowning that often happens with individuals. And does it happen after meals? Does it happen after so-and-so? What is happening in relationship to when the behaviors are starting to present? And it may be, and then taking that information to your physicians, your neuropsychologist, whatever the case may be. It may be something as clear as a bladder infection, or needing to relieve themselves and not knowing how to express it, those types of things. So really being kind of mindful of when these behaviors are starting to present.
And a question just came in, and Holly, maybe you can start with this, and Vicky, you had experience with it, is if I'm having, and Ralph, you mentioned it with your mother, she was wandering and then she wasn't eating. A question came in that they're very challenged with just trying to communicate with the person they're caring for, because the normal sentences and, certain things that you would just have in a conversation, like, we're going to go do this, or, you need to do this. Any advice for that?
Sure. I think, in more classic Alzheimer's disease, we will tend to see what we consider like breakdown in verbal processing skills. Patients may develop the inability to utilize their language, and then they may have difficulty with their receptive language. So many times utilizing visual cues, having a whiteboard that may have the day, the dates to orient the patient Patients still sometimes may be able to read. So again, using visual cues and as much as possible, even for activities of daily living. You may have a binder which indicates, a cartoon for it's time to brush the teeth. Patients can become apraxic, which means that they have the inability to carry out purposeful movements. So many times seeing the visual cue and actually gesturing for brushing teeth may help a patient understand what you're trying to communicate with them. Okay. So visual cues and gesturing may be key. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. You just kind of scale it back a few years, what you used to do when you were teaching your kids. So that's a really good suggestion. And then one quick question came in, and then we're going to go around and ask the same question to everybody else. But a question came in about drug interactions. So Holly, I don't know if you want to take the lorazepam and different drugs. I know that there's a lot, and we're running out of time because we could probably go for another hour. But how do you feel about the different drug interactions? For agitation and psychosis and.
Well, I do not prescribe medications, but as a neuropsychologist, we're trained in psychopharmacology and the effects of medications. And, many times, unfortunately, if the family and the treatment team cannot figure out behavioral maneuvers, environmental modifications, and they have to utilize a medication, obviously our bias is to try to have something that is the least sedating medication as possible. Unfortunately, we simply don't have a lot of medication classes which are wholly effective. And so I think that's when you definitely want to get a really good geriatric psychiatrist on board. Again, the geriatric psychiatrist is key, is someone who sees patients routinely 65 and above, because treating a patient with a dementia syndrome who may have delusions is different than treating a patient who may have delusions related to a psychotic disorder or schizophrenia. It's a very different, playing field here.
That's really good advice. So our last question, and I'll just start with Ralph and we'll go to Vicki, Kristen, and end with Holly, is what is your best advice to give our audience or a family member dealing with Alzheimer's?
I'm just going to repeat what Kristen has already said. It is the disease, it's not the person. So when interacting with somebody who has Alzheimer's disease and having a really difficult time at it, is that just remain calm. Use a soothing tone of voice. And also going back to the delusional thoughts. The thing is that never mock them or belittle them for their paranoid delusions, because they are very real to them. So just when you're interacting with somebody who has Alzheimer's, it's better to be kind than to be right. So that's one that I will ask, or I will impart to our caregivers.
Oh, I'm gonna get a tattoo on that. It's better to be kind than to be right. I think no matter what you're dealing with, that's the right way to go. I love that. Vicki?
I totally agree with you that you have to bite your tongues a lot of times. But one of the things that I did feel that was so helpful for us is we adopted a pet about 2 years before Nick really got sick, and just him holding and stroking that pet made him so much calmer. So if you have pets in your life, just be grateful and thankful, because that does help. But so much of what Ralph just said is right on, with regard to just remember it's a disease. They're not that person. Be kind to them, be calm, and try to project that.
Kristen.
Oh my gosh. From day one, when folks enter my my support groups, we start talking about the importance of being selfish. So many times my men and my women, they come in and they have forgotten how to even engage in any of their self-care. They completely have put themselves last on the totem pole. And I start talking to them about being selfish. Anytime it feels selfish, do it. If it feels like I'm going to maybe feel guilty about this, do it. Do it, do it, do it, and do it often. The need to be right? That always comes up. And I don't remember if it came up in our group, Vicki, but go watch Jeopardy. We don't, everybody has it, right? Everybody has the need to be right. Go ahead and bring them, that little need to be right monster, over to Jeopardy and let them have it, And again, just treat yourself well and often.
And Holly.
Well, I think I have to reiterate how complex dementia is, and the importance not to follow some mantra that you're going to be a perfect caregiver, because this is a very complex disease. And I think it's so important, even early on, in distributing the care, not having one sole caregiver, but kind of weaving in family and friends and hired caregivers from the initial stages of the disease process can also sometimes help with the transition when you really, really, really need that time to go get a massage or get your nails done, or just go outside and breathe some fresh air. I think starting with caregiving and distributing the care with some other individuals earlier rather than later is a really, really good thing to try to kind of implement.
To try to be proactive in your own self-care rather than reacting to a bad situation. I couldn't agree more. I love this kind over right. I need to incorporate that. I'm taking care of my 87-year-old mother now. And sometimes you just get frustrated. You're like, no, I'm right. But who cares if I'm right? Really? No one cares. And I love that it's the disease, not the person. So I cannot thank you all enough. And I encourage our entire audience you'll receive a copy of the webinar and links. I love that the programs are free. Anybody can have them. The support is there. APS, I learned so much about that. I'm so glad, because I used to think, oh my gosh, you hear about CPS and APS but it's a resource. It's a resource, and everybody's here to support everybody. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. And everybody have a safe evening.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.